You assume begging is the last card a narcissist has to play. It is not. It is only the first one, the loudest and easiest to perform, and the moment it fails to bring you back, something far more deliberate begins underneath the surface. Because begging was never really about you. It was a test of whether emotion alone could still pull the strings it used to pull. When that test fails, a narcissist does not retreat quietly, they recalibrate. What follows is not desperation fading into acceptance. It is desperation converting itself into a colder, more strategic form, one built on studying exactly what still moves you, what you still respond to, what version of them you have not yet learned to resist. Understanding what that next attempt actually looks like is the only way to recognize it the moment it arrives instead of mistaking it, once again, for change. The first thing that happens after begging fails is silence, but not the silence you expect. It is not the silence of someone giving up. It is the silence of someone recalculating. For days, sometimes weeks, nothing arrives. No messages, no attempts, no performance. And if you don't understand what is happening beneath that stillness, you might read it as peace, as closure, as the story finally ending on its own. But that silence is not empty. It is observational. The narcissist has stepped back not because they have released you, but because the emotional pleading did not work. And pleading was loud, visible, and easy to reject. So they retreat into a different posture, one where they are no longer performing for you, they are studying you. They are watching from a distance, whether you post differently, whether your routines shift, whether you seem lighter or heavier, whether you still check your phone the way you used to. This is not grief. This is reconnaissance disguised as absence. Think about what begging actually communicated to them. It told them, in the clearest possible terms, that fear and pity were no longer enough to reopen the connection. That is a significant piece of information, and a narcissist does not discard information easily, especially information about the one relationship where their usual formula stopped functioning. So instead of throwing more of the same failed approach at the wall, they pause. Not because they have grown patient, but because patience, for the first time, has a purpose. Every day of silence is a day spent gathering data instead of spending currency, and they have limited currency. Tears, promises, dramatic declarations, all of it costs something, and all of it already failed once. Spending it again without a new strategy would only confirm a second time that it does not work on you anymore. So they hold back, and holding back becomes its own kind of performance, one aimed at making you wonder if perhaps you overreacted, if perhaps the silence means they truly have moved on, if perhaps you should be the one to break it first. What makes this stage so dangerous is that it feels like relief. After weeks or months of chaos, sudden silence can feel like the finish line. You start to exhale. You start to believe the hardest part is behind you. But this is exactly the environment the narcissist needs in order to plan the next approach with precision instead of desperation. Begging was reactive. It came from panic, from the shock of losing access. What comes next is not reactive. It is engineered, and engineering takes quiet. It takes distance. It takes enough space for them to stop asking, "How do I get them back?" and start asking, "What actually works on this person?" This is the turning point most people never see coming because they assume the story only has two endings. Either the narcissist keeps chasing louder or they vanish for good. Neither is accurate. What actually happens is a shift from emotional appeal to strategic appeal. Begging spoke to your compassion. It said, "Look how much I am suffering. Look how sorry I am. Don't you feel something for me?" When that failed, when your compassion did not reopen the door, the narcissist does not conclude that compassion is unavailable. They conclude that compassion was the wrong key for this particular lock. So they start testing other keys. This is where the pattern becomes colder because it is no longer built on raw emotion. It is built on calculation. There is a specific kind of humiliation buried inside that realization for them, one most people never consider. Begging is, in its own twisted way, an act of exposure. It shows need. It shows that they cannot simply walk away and be fine. And for someone whose entire identity rests on appearing untouchable, that exposure is intolerable once it fails to produce a result. Failed begging does not just mean losing you. It means having revealed vulnerability for nothing. That double loss, the loss of access and the loss of the mask, is often what pushes the shift from emotional pleading into something far more controlled. The next version of them will not risk that same exposure again. Whatever comes next will be constructed so that if it fails too, they can retreat behind the claim that they never really needed anything from you at all. The next attempt is rarely another version of begging. It is something quieter, something that looks almost like restraint. You may notice a message that isn't emotional at all. It might be practical, distant, even indifferent on the surface. A question about logistics. A comment about something unrelated to the relationship. A casual mention of a memory, dropped without any visible agenda. This is intentional. After tears failed to move you, the narcissist tests whether normalcy will. They are watching to see if a version of them that seems unbothered, composed, even slightly detached, is more effective at drawing you back in than the version that was falling apart. Because if desperation didn't work, maybe indifference will. And indifference is a strategy precisely because it removes the thing you were resisting. You were resisting their need. So now they hide the need. This is the moment where many people lower their guard because the behavior looks like growth. It looks like maturity. It looks like the narcissist has finally accepted the ending and simply wants to exist in the same world as you without conflict. But notice the timing. Notice how this sudden calm arrives right after their emotional approach failed, not months of genuine reflection later, but almost immediately, like a costume change between acts of the same performance. Real acceptance does not need an audience. It does not require you to witness it in order to exist. But this version of calm is aimed directly at you, timed to reach you, shaped to be seen. That is the tell. Growth that only appears once it stops being useful to observe is not growth. It is adjustment. As this phase continues, the narcissist begins refining their approach based on your reactions, even the smallest ones. If you respond to a neutral message, even briefly, even out of politeness, that response becomes data. They notice how quickly you replied, how warm or cold your tone was, whether you asked a question back, whether you left the door open even a centimeter. Every fragment of engagement becomes part of an updated profile of what still works. This is not paranoia on your part. This is simply how someone whose sense of control depends on predicting your behavior operates. They are not thinking about winning your heart back in some romantic sense. They are thinking about restoring a system where they know how to produce a reaction in you, because unpredictability is the one thing they cannot tolerate. Your unpredictability is what broke their old formula. So the goal now becomes rebuilding a new one. This is where the pattern often escalates into something that looks like generosity or insight. You might hear things you were once desperate to hear. Statements that sound like accountability. Acknowledgement of specific moments that hurt you, described with unsettling accuracy. This can feel disarming because it seems to prove they finally understand what they did. But listen closely to what these statements are doing. They are not opening a conversation about repair with no expectation attached. They are reintroducing themselves as safe, as changed, as worth reconsidering, using the exact details that once made you feel unseen. This is not empathy arriving late. This is empathy being used as a tool, aimed precisely at the wound that never fully closed. The narcissist has learned, through the failure of begging, that raw emotion alone does not work on you anymore. So they borrow the language of insight instead, because insight feels earned, and earned things feel safer to trust. Another layer of this stage involves testing your boundaries in small, almost invisible ways, rather than large emotional demands. Instead of asking you to come back, they might ask for something minor, a short conversation, a single meeting, a brief explanation of something unrelated to the relationship itself. These requests seem harmless individually, but they are functioning as boundary probes. Each time you agree to something small, it becomes evidence in their mind that the wall you built is not as solid as it appeared. If you agree to one small thing, the next request becomes slightly larger, still framed as reasonable, still framed as low stakes. This is not accidental drift. This is incremental testing, the same instinct that drove them to observe your routines during the silence, now applied directly to your responses. Notice also how these requests are almost always framed around something that sounds impossible to refuse without seeming unreasonable yourself. A shared responsibility that needs a short conversation, a piece of mail that needs picking up, a mutual friends event where avoiding each other would supposedly cause more drama than simply being civil for one evening. None of these framings are accidents either. They are chosen specifically because refusing them would require you to explain yourself, and explaining yourself means re-engaging, even briefly, with the very dynamic you were trying to step outside of. The goal was never really about the mail or the event. The goal was to create a situation where saying no cost you more socially than saying yes cost you emotionally, at least on the surface. That inversion is deliberate, and it is one of the clearest signs that what looks like a small, harmless request is actually a carefully positioned test of how much access still remains available. What makes this new phase so much harder to detect than the earlier chaos is that it rarely repeats the old mistakes. The narcissist who once raged is unlikely to rage again in the same way, at least not right away, because rage already failed. The narcissist who once flooded you with apologies is unlikely to flood you again in the same tone, because that already failed too. What you are witnessing now is a version of them built specifically around your resistance, shaped by everything that did not work before. This is why so many people describe this stage with the same confused sentence. This doesn't even feel like them anymore. And in a sense, they are right. It is not the same performance. It is an upgraded one, built entirely from the data of their previous failure. There is a specific moment inside this phase that deserves close attention. The moment where the narcissist begins mirroring the language of healing itself. They may start using words associated with therapy, growth, or self-reflection, not because they have engaged in real internal work, but because they have noticed that this is the language that resonates with you now. If you have spent time processing what happened, if you have spoken about boundaries, patterns, or self-worth, that language becomes visible to them, and visibility becomes material. They begin speaking as though they have arrived at the same insights independently, describing themselves in terms that sound remarkably similar to your own healing vocabulary. This is one of the most disorienting tactics precisely because it borrows credibility from your own growth and redirects it back toward them. You might hear phrases that sound almost identical to things you once said to a friend, or things you once wrote down for yourself in a private moment of clarity. Words like accountability, or emotional safety, or holding space, delivered with a fluency that feels jarring coming from someone who once treated those same concepts as irrelevant or even mockable. The discomfort you feel in that moment is worth paying attention to, because it is your own instincts recognizing a mismatch between vocabulary and history. Genuine growth tends to arrive slowly, unevenly, often without perfect language at all. It stumbles, it contradicts itself. It shows up in actions long before it shows up in polished sentences. What you are looking at here moves in the opposite direction, fluent language arriving suddenly, with no visible struggle behind it, aimed with unusual precision at the exact themes you have been working through. That precision is not a coincidence, and it is not proof of transformation. It is proof of observation. Underneath all of this, the core motivation has not changed at all. It was never about missing who you are as a whole person. It was about losing access to the specific function you served, whether that function was admiration, emotional labor, validation, or simply having someone whose attention could be relied upon. Begging revealed the panic of that loss. This new, colder phase reveals the strategy built to recover it. The narcissist is not becoming a different person. They are becoming a more efficient version of the same one that has learned which levers you no longer respond to and is now searching for the ones you might. Recognizing this pattern does not require you to become suspicious of every message or interpret every neutral text as a hidden plot. It requires something calmer than that. It requires noticing timing, noticing sequence, noticing whether change appeared only after old tactics stopped working, and whether that change is aimed specifically at reaching you rather than existing independently of your attention. Genuine change tends to be quiet in a different way. It does not require an audience to validate it. It does not arrive precisely engineered around your resistance. It simply exists, whether or not you are there to witness it. The most protective thing you can do in this stage is resist the urge to reward composure the same way you once resisted rewarding chaos. Calm is not automatically safe. Distance is not automatically growth. Insight is not automatically accountability. Each of these can be genuine, but only time, consistency, and behavior with nothing to gain will reveal which version you are facing. Until then, the wisest position is the same one that got you this far, staying grounded in what you know rather than what is being performed in front of you. One useful measure, though never a perfect one, is asking a simple question whenever a new approach arrives. Would this exact behavior still be happening if I were completely unreachable? If there were no possibility of me ever seeing it or responding to it at all? Genuine change tends to survive that question. It continues quietly in the background of someone's life because it was never dependent on an audience in the first place. Strategic change tends to collapse under that same question because its entire architecture was built around the assumption that you would eventually notice, respond, or soften. If the behavior only makes sense as a message directed at you, then it was never really about becoming a healthier person. It was about becoming a more convincing performance of one. It also helps to remember that this recalibrated phase is not a sign of your failure to set a firm enough boundary the first time. It is, in a strange way, a sign that your original boundary worked exactly as it was supposed to. Begging failed because you did not respond to raw emotional pressure anymore. That forced a shift. The shift itself is evidence of your own growth, not a loophole in it. The narcissist would not need to search for a new approach if the old one had still been effective. Every recalculation on their end is, indirectly, a confirmation of how far you have already come, even if it does not feel that way in the moment you are trying to make sense of their next move. If you recognize this pattern unfolding in your own life, the most important step is not confrontation, and it is not explanation. It is documentation in your own mind, if nowhere else, of what changed, when it changed, and what it was aimed at producing in you. That clarity becomes your protection, because the moment you can name the strategy, it loses the one thing it depends on to work, your uncertainty. If this resonated with you, take a moment to subscribe and share this with someone who might be standing exactly where you once stood, still trying to understand why the story didn't end where they expected it to. And if you want to go deeper into what comes after this stage, when even the recalibrated approach fails, that is a conversation worth continuing. Because the pattern does not stop here, it only becomes quieter.